Now, the benchmark, again, we talked about our 6 principles. That's about all we're going to do. Again, it's not a real measurement of what we know if I give us a study guide for it and give us half the test questions. Okay? It's not that kind of assessment. Okay, so that's going to be tomorrow. Now, I did redesign it. If you recall, the cartoon on there was very small, hard to read, and there were 1 or 2 other images that were like that. I found another cartoon with kind of the same theme about big business and interest groups controlling Congress. And I retyped it just to make it a little bit easier to read. Okay. That'll be, I'll return our other test from Monday to us tomorrow. Jake.
How can we study for this?
Well, you just kind of focus on your 6 principles and think of those things. It's not something you're prepping for. Okay, so it's kind of like, yeah. Well, it's kind of like a real true final, not a final where I go over like things like that. I know what you're saying. That's not a fair assessment for.
It was like 10 or so points.
No, it's only 39. Oh, that's a lot smaller.
Oh my God.
I mean, there's. Please listen up. Okay. Again, all valid questions, but we want it to be something realistic in the sense of is this an accurate measurement of things I've picked up on. Now, half the questions are things you're reading or looking at right on there. Okay. And as I showed us our scores the other day, if like there were half of us in here got 20, 25 or above on things we never even studied for this class. So we should be able to do a whole lot better. Okay. Now, I'm not looking to give anyone a 10 out of 40. I'll work on something with that, but I need to do this as a retest. If someone really gets a very low grade, we can work something out better. Okay. But the thing is, at this point in the year, you know, kids don't do anything that's not worth points or isn't great. Okay. No, we'll have some quick writes. We'll have a small assessment on this stuff on the Constitution grade. We'll have a small assessment. Okay, we'll get some points for the things we did yesterday. Okay, great. Now, yesterday we talked about things like school prayer. And we said if 61% of the people would still want to have school prayer. We're going to look at something else today, nativity scenes as establishment of religion. Now, none of the nativity scene you have in your house or you put in your front yard around Christmas, but nativity scenes on city, borough property, or imagine if we put a nativity scene on the township property. Now, here's how that scene is establishment. If the township purchases it, the township stores it in its warehouse, and who puts it out? Township workers. That is seen as unconstitutional because what the courts have said is it's the township endorsing or establishing Christianity above other religions. Now, what the courts have also said is if, in many cases, if you have reindeer, snowmen, Santa Claus, Christmas trees, and other things like that, that's often ruled constitutional. Okay, we're going to watch this first segment from Elwood City a few years ago. Now, a group, Freedom From Religion, threatened to sue Elwood City. Now, Elwood City doesn't have $10,000 to spend on lawyers to fight this. So as you watch this, try to come up with some views. What do you think about if the nativity scene's on government property?
Residents told us this has been a difficult year dealing with the
on
controversy over this nativity, but the mayor says he doesn't think the fight's over, and he believes the nativity will be back in its old home one day soon. Elwood City residents sang in the rain to unveil the new home of the city's nativity scene, a former church right down the street from the Borough building where it had been on display for more than 50 years until a threat from an atheist group.
They can change the font and on our beliefs.
The move from the Borough building was a controversial one. The Wisconsin-based Freedom from Religion Foundation claimed the crèche violated the separation of church and state, and the legal battle sparked massive demonstrations last year in support of the display. But the Borough Council decided it couldn't win the fight and approved moving it this spring.
Well, it's been a difficult time for all the residents of Elwood. We all do support it. This is a Christian community back to the 1800s when it was first conceived here.
The Borough building is still decorated for the season, just no Christian symbols. The nativity didn't go far, just a few blocks down the street to the former St. Agatha Church on 5th Street. Elwood City Attorney Joe Bellissimo owns it.
They came to me and asked me if they could use our property, and I was proud to say yes.
The crowd to celebrate the Nativity's new home was smaller than in years past, just a few dozen people compared to about 1,000 last year. But the mayor says he believes the overwhelming majority of his town supports having the display where it used to be, and he'll fight to get it back there.
But I believe, like the rest of our community, it belongs to City Hall. That's my plan down the road.
The crowd also passed out signs today reading Elwood, the city with the nativity, and they're asking residents to put those up in their front yards. Bob,
So, we don't make these things up for election, because if we voted on it in Elwood City, 90% of the people are going to say, what's the big deal, keep it there. But what happens is, you're going to hear the phrase outed in this next section here. What happened is, in these places, let's just say we all live in Elwood. I'm an atheist, and I don't like the fact that my borough building has a nativity scene. I call up Freedom from Religion and say, hey, you need to threaten Elwood City with a lawsuit over this. I don't think they should be doing this. That's what happens in this small town in Ohio. Now, this will be something along the lines of what you often see on Fox News, MSNBC. Okay.
For years, the village of Elmore, Ohio, has put out a traditional faith-based nativity scene for the holidays. Town councilmen we spoke to don't know who outed them, but somebody told the proudly atheist Freedom from Religion Foundation about this little nativity scene. And the next thing the town knew, it was threatened with a lawsuit. The foundation said placing a nativity scene in a public park violated separation of church and state. Now, rather than fight it in court because the village said they couldn't afford it, they moved the scene to a private yard across from the park. So does the nativity scene amount to a government endorsement of religion, or is it a community tradition that's more secular than religious? Let's talk about it. It's night court time. Attorney Lisa Garber is here to make a case for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Attorney David Bill wants to keep that nativity scene in the park. Great to see you both tonight. Great to be here. Okay, so the market or the town has decided they couldn't afford this lawsuit, so they said we're just going to move it across the street. Apparently, someone there says, "Fine with me." I think it's a retired mayor of the town. He says you can put it up here. Lisa, why would it be a problem on government property?
It's a problem because it violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. You cannot have the government trying to advance, promote, or endorse any religion. And by nature, a nativity scene, the birth of Christ, is extremely religious.
Well, David, you know the Supreme Court has recognized that there are circumstances in which nativity scenes are just part of a holiday display, and that localities can, in many circumstances, have them up without too much trouble.
Right, and that's the principle that I'm going to rely on, because I think they wanted to avoid litigation, and that's why they moved it, but they didn't have to. They needed to make this a broader holiday scene as opposed to just a nativity scene. They could keep what they have there, but they need to bring in other things, snowmen and Christmas trees and Santa Claus and things like that. And if they would have done that, then they would have been able to pass the constitutional muster pursuant to our U.S. Supreme Court cases, and they would not have to have litigated or spent all the money on the attorneys.
All right, so Lisa, if they bring in some Santa Claus and some Christmas trees, which they said is apparently going to be their plan next year, will that take care of the issue for groups like the atheist group that's threatened them?
Not necessarily. What David's referencing is what sometimes is lovingly referred to as the reindeer clause, meaning if you bring in some plastic Santas and Mrs. Clauses, you can make it secular. It's not going to be a religious issue. But the problem here is we don't know if there is any sort of religious signage on there. Supreme Court precedent is really split, and these cases are extremely factually dependent.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to argue the context. You look at the reasonable person standard. Is somebody looking at this nativity display going to say, wow, they're really promoting Christianity? And that's the problem. You really want to get everybody involved, make it secular. You can definitely have the Christmas spirit there, but you need to be inclusive. And that's really what we're seeing. I agree. If you add some plastic Santas and reindeers and potentially a menorah, you make it more Christmas tradition, holiday tradition, that would be helpful. And I agree, the litigation is expensive. I understand why they would want to try to avoid it.
Yeah, of course. Now, David, a lot of people out there, they roll their eyes. I will get a ton of Twitter and Facebook feedback about this segment because people get angry about this. Like, hello, Christmas is about the birth of Christ. And so if you're going to say this is a holiday season and Christmas season, I mean, I once lived in a place where the homeowners association told us we had to take down wreaths because wreaths were considered religious symbols because they denoted Christmas. I mean, a lot of folks out there just only have so much tolerance for the fight on Christmas or the war on Christmas, as they
No question about it. And the fact is, this has been done forever. And this is what we're going to hear in the blogs, no question about it. But unfortunately, that is not a defense for the First Amendment. And yes, there is the Establishment Clause. And it is crystal clear that a public facility or property cannot advertise and promote a religion. So it has to be compliant. And now they have the attention from this atheist group. Now that they need to do it the right way. And it can be done. No question about that.
All right, David and Lisa are legal eagles for tonight. The counselors have made their cases. So let us know on Twitter at Shannon Dream or at Fox News Night what you think and how you would rule the case. In the meantime,
Remember, about half the people care about voting. Are most people really concerned? No, we're going to have 10% who might walk by that nativity scene and really reflect on it and maybe say a prayer to themselves, right? Maybe another 10% saying, I can't believe there's a nativity scene on public property. I can't believe it. The other 80%, we wake up now, Brady. I really don't mind you sleeping.
Oh, even so.
You just have your head down for it, not
That's all I'm doing.
Now, the other 80%, you think it's an issue, Joe? Think it's an issue for them? No, would you? No. They're not walking around, oh, I'm just so offended by that. Now, if someone's religious, they might say, yeah, I like the nativity scene, but do we really want the nativity scene? Then 5 feet away, we have Santa Claus and frosting. Okay. Hey, we have the nativity scene, we have a donkey, a couple cows, and the camels for the wise men. Then we got Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer back. Okay, that's what would be going on. That stuff's permitted. Okay, those kind of displays are permitted. So I'm just trying to show us we have these issues like school prayer. 61% of the people still favor it. Nativity scenes, about 70% of the people still favor them on public property. Now, Samantha, do you think the average Christian wants every religious display up there for every holiday? No. Now, we're going to take a small amount of notes today, wrap up with a quick write on a couple cases and what you might agree with. Okay. Okay. So first, we're going to. When I say small amounts, I really mean small amounts. Okay. Now, this is going to close out yesterday. This is going to close out the Establishment Clause. So this is going to close out the establishment. Then we're going to take a little bit of notes on the Free Exercise Clause. And what I've seen that all day is students really struggling to find these 3 cases we do today. And so just to save some time of looking up things that aren't correct and then me correcting all of us, we'll just kind of do it together in some notes. And then we'll do a quick break. Okay, this is closing out the Establishment Clause. Now, in some ways, this is one of the few ways I think our book would have been a little more helpful, but I'm certainly not going to ask us all to bring our books the last couple of days. We could have just looked up 25 court cases and had one-line summaries of them. That would have done some time. Other parts, I think, the Chromebooks that have it. Okay, so all the cases we looked at yesterday dealt with limited government from establishing religion. Now, if you're a Christian, you might not see it as, oh, is it endorsing Christianity? Because we don't see it that way. Okay? So we need to look at it from the viewpoint of minorities. And as we talk about this, okay, remember, at one point, Christianity was a minority. Think of how that was persecuted by the Romans and some others, that in today's society where Christians are much more pronounced than other religions in the United States, we often forget about those things, right? Okay? Whether it was the Babylonians persecuting people, the Romans, etc. Okay? Now, so it's establishment of religion if we all have to say a basic Christian prayer. Okay? These are some other issues. I'm not giving us cases here that I'm not going to have time to test us on, just to take more time up. Busing to religious schools. If your parents would send you to Kennedy Catholic, St. Vitus, Shannon's going to pick up the tab for transportation because it's seen as benefiting the student. If you would choose to go to North Catholic, that's too far away. That's in Cranberry. Okay? The Shannon's not going to be responsible. It's only like a 15-mile radius if you choose to go to a private school. Tax exemptions for church property. Okay? Think of all the churches in the Shannon. Now, what else? Let's make sure we get this. What else is exempt? Everything that church owns that's religious. A house for the priests, a house for the pastor. Okay. Now, churches, yeah, they're large. What's even bigger? The parking lots. Think of all the area in the Shannon that is untaxed. First Baptist parking lot. Look how big that is. St. Camillus, Northminster, First Assembly of God. And then you have some other churches that aren't quite as big. So when that's untaxed, guess what? Our taxes are higher. Okay, so if Lawrence County started taxing that property, maybe our tax goes down a little bit. Okay, and then we have nativity scenes. Now, are there a whole lot of atheists nationwide? If you had to make a guess, Jack, no. But there's a whole lot of people who are other religions. You might say, well, do I want my tax dollars basically going? Okay, if you don't need to get distracted. Okay, distracted. Like for example, if I'm a Christian in a Muslim community, I might get offended that they're putting up stuff for Muslim holidays, right? Would that be easy to do, Chris? Get offended if they're putting up Muslim stuff for Muslim holidays. Yeah. If I'm the majority, though, do I often see that, Joe? No. Yeah. So those are all things that take our tax dollars, and that's what the courts look at. Obviously, it's establishment of religion. You're using. Here's how this court see it: are taxpayer dollars going to advance religion? Yes. Okay. Do I really want my tax dollars going to put up other religious holidays? No. So I would say, well, then don't put up a nativity scene that my tax dollars are going for. And at the same time, don't put up something for a Hindu holiday or Buddhist holiday. Now, schools have to be very familiar, probably recall the Holiday Food Fest. Can we call it the Christmas Food Fest? No. But think to yourself, what are the big religious holidays we're off for? Christmas and Easter. Birth of Jesus, resurrection of Jesus, right? Is that what it's called? Hey, so when we're told things at school, you know, for Easter, are we really focusing on the religious aspect of it? Okay. No. Okay. Now, make some kind of heading here. Okay. We're going to talk about free exercise. So do something, put it in bold like I did, make it all caps, do something. Okay, we're still on freedom of religion. We looked at establishment, now we're looking at free exercise. Okay. Don't really have a lot of notes here. We're looking at only 3 cases. And we're going to really focus on the bottom 2. You can't even see the last one. Okay, so the court case is Mukini Babalu I was a church versus City of Hialeah. Okay, now I think I said something the other day. There's this religion out there, Santeria. It's kind of a combination of African religions, Caribbean, and a little bit of Catholicism thrown in. Some voodoo, okay? As soon as this Santeria church, Mukini Babalu I, said we're going to move to Hialeah, Florida, Hialeah passed a law banning animal sacrifice. Never heard it pronounced. I'm calling it Mukini Babalu I. Okay, never heard it pronounced. So Hialeah passes a law, no animal sacrifice. Now, I'm certainly not advocating anything here. Okay, and obviously if I'm an animal rights person, I would oppose killing of any animals, right? But this was the killing of animals in a religious ceremony that only the priest or minister is doing. And he's doing it within the church. This was not, you know, feeding stray cats and dogs and then killing. Okay? It sounds odd to us, but the Old Testament is full of animal sacrifice. Over and over again, the killing of animals to, you know, for God. Okay? The New Testament, much less. Okay, right? So I'm not sitting here advocating religion. Just trying, I'm sure some of us are familiar with it. Okay? Now, so make sure you get what the Supreme Court ruled. Okay, so what did the Supreme Court rule? Didn't say no animal sacrifice. Okay. It struck down Hialeah's law banning sacrifice. Okay, and I'm giving this to us because throughout the day, everyone, and I'm walking around getting all the answers. People are saying, "Oh, struck down a city law banning animal sacrifice." Some people were getting confused, thinking it said no animal sacrifice. Okay, so this wasn't someone getting picked up on animal cruelty charges and saying, "Oh, it's part of my religion." That wasn't covered. Okay. And this Santeria is pretty popular in the Caribbean. Like I said, a lot of people call it voodoo. Voodoo that you do. So voodoo. Now, I'm just bringing this up because some things are unpopular. Most people aren't in favor of animal sacrifice. Just like most people want school prayer. Most people want nativity scenes on their borough property. It's not up for a vote. Okay. Now, next 2 cases. Now, next 2, you really need to know these ones. Okay. Now, really get these ones down. I'm giving us a heads up. Doing this quick right. Okay. It's going to be on, we're not going to have a regular test with 40, 50 questions next week. It's probably going to be a little bit smaller. But one of the questions is going to be, I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to give you these cases. I'm not going to tell you what they say. You're going to have to try to recall which one you agree with. Now, let's look at the first one. Minersville. This is in, remember the SD stands for school district. This is in Pennsylvania.
It's probably Jake.
And quit emailing us.
Yeah. Look at this email that you sent.
Okay.
You're lying.
Now, let's be quiet.
Oh, my email right on there.
Listen, you know I could go to 243 every day. Now, this first case, these were both brought about by small religious groups, the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, the Jehovah's Witnesses say and believe that if we're saluting the flag, we're pledging allegiance to the flag, we're kind of putting that up there with another god, something else to be worshipped. Okay? And so they refuse to salute the flag. Now the flag salutes used to be like this. Okay? I'll show us in a few minutes. That was called the Bellamy salute after the person who wrote the pledge, Francis Bellamy. So in 1940, now this started in the late 30s in Minersville School District, the Gavaitis children were expelled for not saluting the flag. The parents lost both their jobs because their kids weren't saluting the flag. Okay? They ended up, I don't even know where, they ended up having to move somewhere else out of the state. So this wasn't something that people were just saying to be funny, oh, I'm not going to stand for the pledge. This was, hey, when I stand for the pledge, it would be like, Catholics hundreds of years ago being forced to eat meat on Good Friday. Those kinds of things. So this wasn't something to be made light of. And I did like some of the cases we looked up stressed that this was the freedom of speech issue. No, it was freedom of religion. Schools were forcing these kids, again, imagine nowadays kids have more rights, kids are respected more in schools. Back then it was, hey, whatever the teacher or principal said, no one complained. So mandatory flag salutes are unconstitutional. Hey, detention, expulsion. None of this, oh, well, how about if they just sit in the back and be quiet? That wasn't done. So that was 1940. Mandatory means required or compulsory. So as we're talking about this, think of, is that the way it should be, or do you agree more with the 1943 case? West Virginia Board of Ed v. Barnett, which reversed itself. Just 3 years later, the court said something else. Now, which case is precedent? So if we're in school here and we start disciplining kids for not saying the pledge, which case applies? 1940 or 43? So you're getting expelled for not, that's too strong. Just say you start getting detention and Saturday detentions for not saying the pledge. Which case applies? Brady, which case applies? Which case would your parents, lawyers want to use? 1940 or 43? That's going to be 43 because it is the more recent case. We'd be quiet. The most recent case is the one that's precedent. So you're getting detention for not saying the pledge. The school's not going to say, well, in 1940, mandatory flag salutes are constitutional, so we're going to keep giving you detention. No. The courts would say, Shannon, you can't give these kids detention. In 1943, the court said you can't force people to be patriotic. During the height of World War II, listen to this, during the height of World War II, The court said you can't force people to do this. It wasn't, hey, we're fighting the Nazis and Japanese, we all got to say the pledge. It was, you can't make people be patriotic. You can't make every person take their hat off for the national anthem and sporting. You can't make people stop walking to their seats when the national anthem is played. Now, how does this pertain to school? Let's just say we're home, this is my home room. Joe's not standing for the pledge. Okay. Quick call home. Hey, your son's not going to, as long as he sits there quietly, he's not getting written up. I'm just calling to tell you he's not standing for the pledge. He's not getting written up as long as he's quiet. Now, if kids are back there playing on their phones, their computers, while everyone else is saying the pledge, then it's a problem. But I couldn't get away with writing people off for not saying the pledge because of the 1940s. Okay. Now, in the same way,
I never do the pledge.
in the same way,
Never.
I know there are some classes. Is anyone in a room that you don't even? No one says it. People don't even stand up. Okay. Now, is anyone saying it? Brady?
No. I've only did it once.
No, I don't mean you.
No, like
You don't stand up or the
I don't
class
even hear
doesn't
it. I don't even hear it. We don't even turn on the TV. We really just sit there.
My TV's busted. But, yeah, I mean, I just kind of lead us in it. Now, several years ago, stop, please. Several years ago, hey, everyone stood up. Only a few people actually said it. Okay, I can't walk around. Hey, I don't hear you singing. I can't do those things. Now, what's
You're done.
okay? Okay, in fact, we can all shut them. Okay.
You gotta ruin it, Wiley. See what you do? See what you do, Wiley. We got an organ paper.
I'm talking to somebody. You're sure the usual suspects. Can't figure that out. Right. Right now.
All right, well, what do you want me to say?
Okay. We're not going to be using those. I'll just have us put them over on the counter if you want.
See, Wiley?
It's always someone.
It was me.
It's
It's always someone this man. Always.
okay, now,
Thanks a lot, Bailey.
we still have these up here. Just be quiet. Okay, we still have these up here. Listen, we're on the blank side. Now, I need a couple sentences here. Which case do you agree with? Minersville? Please look up here. Do you agree with Minersville that flag salute should be mandatory? Should you be forced to say the pledge? And if you don't, you get punished? Or do you agree with West Virginia v. Barnett? Mandatory flags are unconstitutional. Yes.
I already wrote the big paragraph on my phone. Can I copy it to there? It's just me. I just need to.
No, say you could.
Wiley, you're such a bum.
Okay, tomorrow,
That was
either don't bring it, or I'm just going to stack them over there and do some other.
It's like 5 minutes to bring it.
I would play balloons.
Okay. Okay, so, which case do you agree with? Which case do you agree with, either Minersville or West Virginia? Do you think the pledge should be mandatory or not mandatory? Remember, mandatory means if you don't say it, you're getting punished with detention. Yeah. Which case do you agree with? And don't put the top one or bottom one. I need Minersville v. Gavias or West Virginia v. Board of Ed. Okay. one case. That's the other. Okay. So when we say mandatory, that means you don't say the pledge, you're getting punished. So it comes down to, do you think we should be forced to say the pledge? Stand for the national anthem, salute the flag. Make sure you put your name on this. Just need a couple sentences. Now, this will be a test question next week. Okay, hold on to that, please. This will be a test question, but you're not going to have the answers right underneath that. Okay. So I'm going to give you the two cases. You're going to have to try to recall what they said. Okay. Now these are just like the quick writes we did yesterday. Just a couple points. Now, as we talk about these things,